Hey y'all, so today we're going to go back into chapter 8 and start trap number 4. I hope you're doing good. I'm getting by. I'm getting a little better every day. So I just really appreciate all the kind comments and the support. It means a lot. Thank you so much. Trap number 4 is injury to basic instinct, the consequence of capture. So this is it's pretty interesting. She starts going into it by describing instinct, and she says instinct is difficult to define. And she mentions, Carl Jung again, and the different layers of the psyche and how that comes into play with our instincts. And she even mentions the symbology of dreams, and which is interesting. I've always heard it called symbolism. I've never heard symbology. I wonder if it's the same thing. Another thing to look up. I feel like every video I'm always saying I'll have to look that up. But anyway, so she relates it to that. So then I'm going to go ahead and start reading in here for you all. It says, etymologically, the word instinct derives from the Latin instinguere, meaning impulse. Also instinctus, meaning instigation, to incite or impel an innate prompting. The idea of instinct can be valued positively as an inner something that, when blended with forethought and consciousness, guides humans to integral behavior. A woman is born with all instinct intact. Although we could say that the child in the tale has been swept into a new environment, one in which her roughness is smoothed down and her difficult life is removed, in reality, her individuation ceases. Her striving to develop stops. And that's what a narcissist wants. They want you to sort of, like be their shadow, just be a replica of them to push their agenda forward, and any attempt at your individuation, like my experience was, any self-expression, even, in a positive manner, is like a individuating against. I think they view that as you going against their agenda. And so that's why they are very rigid in general, just with their expectations and even their mannerisms, which is why they're described as, very robotic. And I just think this story is great. The characters in the story to truly bring to life and help us ruminate on our experience for the purpose of learning and tying it into this story so that we can pull some deep wisdom from it, which is what we want. But it says her individuation ceases, her striving to develop stops. Because remember, the old lady was in the story was described previously by the author as being a calcifying force. So it says, and when the old woman, now she says, a stultifying presence, sees the works of the creative spirit as refuse rather than riches, and burns her red shoes. The child becomes more than silent. She becomes sad, which is the expected state when creative spirit is locked away from natural soul life. Worse, the child's instinct to properly flee this plight is dull to a nothing. So take that to heart. Instead of beating yourself up, like, why didn't I leave? It does something to you being in these circumstances. Just messes with your mind and your instincts, your natural instincts. So I hope that brings you a little bit of peace and lessens any kind of self-conviction you may have inside that, it's you may not even understand why you did or didn't do certain things when you were involved with these people. 'Cause you acted out of character. I've heard people mention that, and it's very true. And she's explaining this here. So it says, worse, Worse, the child's instinct to properly flee this plight is dulled to a nothing. Instead of aiming toward new life, she sits down in a psychic pool of glue. I'm gonna tell you, when I said I can resonate with the whole feeling frozen thing, I love this description. Yes, this is exactly how it felt for me, being stuck. Literally, it felt that way. Lack of fleeing when it is absolutely warranted causes depression. Another trap. So she says, call the soul what you like. One's marriage to the wild, one's hope for the future, one's fluming energy, one's creative passion. My way, what I do, the beloved, the wild groom, the feather on the breath of God. Whatever words or images you may have for this process in your life, it is that which has become captured, which is why the creative spirit of the psyche becomes so bereft. So then she goes into a really interesting section about studying wildlife, animals who have been placed in zoos. And she says no matter how well taken care of they are in the zoo environment, it's just a very common thing to see them go into these similar kind of behaviors as us when we are captured in a narcissistic controlling environment, that it's almost the same. And she specifically mentions even though their human keepers love them, as indeed they do, the creatures often become unable to breed, their appetites for food and rest become skewed, their vital behaviors dwindle to lethargy, sullenness, or untoward aggressiveness. And it says zoologists call this behavior in captives animal depression. So I hope, again, that's more validation for you that, you know, God places in us these instincts. And I feel like, you know, when the Bible talks about us being made in His image, that, you know, one of the main forces that makes God who He is creation. And I think that same force is within us, you know, that we are meant to grow, to be in continual change in a good way. Our spirits are, you know, the essence, I feel like, is dynamic. And I feel like that spark of us, that, you know, the spark that's within us, that's like a part of the main flame of God, the fire of God. Because, you know, God is described as a fire, among other things in the Bible. You know, I mean, if you consider Alpha and Omega too, right? But we are like sparks of that creative fire, and so we're meant to be in that essence, to live in that essence of expression, creativity, and the people that are right for us are going to love that about us, because they're going to have it within them too. And so when you see these people who are bound by rigid laws and rules, and remember, through the Christian lens, you know, Christ came to set us free, and He spoke out against those kind of things a lot. And He was really, in my mind, you know, a rebel. And so if you just take this through the spiritual lens, I think that it can kind of give you some perspective and comfort. And, you know, you can certainly, you know, kind of just dial into a different lens to fit your beliefs, and hopefully still get something from this message. But so I'm gonna get well. I'm gonna get well. Thank God for cough drops. So anyway, yeah, this little section on the animals that are placed in zoos was really interesting. And again, I just encourage you to get the book if you don't have it yet, so you can just take your time with it and dig into all the areas. So it says, when she goes back into, you know, talking about people being instinct injured. She says, what should come naturally comes not at all, or after too much tugging, pulling, rationalizing, fighting with herself, because sometimes if you're exposed to these narcissists, be it a parent especially, or someone you're really close to or you're entangled with for a long time, that voice from them can sink into our mind, which is why we're supposed to watch what we take in, watch the things that we watch and the things that we hear and the things we take in, because it can turn into our internal voice as well. So when she mentions fighting with herself, that's kind of what I'm talking about here. It says, when I speak of over-domestication as capture, I do not refer to socialization. This is where she's saying, hey, I'm being reasonable. The process whereby children are taught to behave in more or less civilized ways. Social development is critical and important. Without it, a woman cannot make her way in the world. Okay, so of course we know, we got you. We know you're being reasonable, is what I would say to her. But too much domestication is like forbidding the vital essence to dance. In its proper and healthy state, the wild self is not docile or vacuous. It is alert and responsive to any given moment or movement. Any given movement or moment. It is not locked into an absolute and repetitive pattern for any and all circumstances. It has creative choice. The instinct-injured woman has no choice. She just stays stuck. This reminds me of when I have observed children, both when I was teaching, excuse me, and in families that I've known, people I've known. It's always sad to me when the people with them, the parents or the caretakers, whoever they're with, are more concerned about making sure they behave properly than the child's psychological well-being. And it goes back to a previous chapter we covered, I can't remember which one, where the mother in the story was that way. I think it might have been the ugly duckling. And look, I understand as a parent, I get it, that you want your kid to behave. So again, I'm not talking about just the normal kind of, hey, tone down, keep it down, hey, behave yourself. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the extremes, because I've witnessed when a child was being very sweet and innocent, and not doing anything whatsoever out of bounds, of what should be appropriate, but the parent or the grandparent in this case just overreacted, and hey, stop that. And it just you could watch the shame come over the child's face, like, oh my God. And this kind of stuff, if it's especially I think a pattern, it affects them, it affects people. And so that's why when I'm reading this kind of stuff, and I bet you can probably think of instances too, either, within yourself, your own experiences, or your family, or your, in-laws or ex-in-laws, or friends, just people you've known, acquaintances. I'm sure you can start to kind of, look at some things that stuck with you through a different lens, and pull deeper meaning from old experiences. And it's just all going to help to enrich our discernment. Because in the moment when I think, we see these things, we know it's wrong, we know something's off. Sometimes you can just tell when something's off with somebody, but you don't really have the knowledge at that point to label it or to really understand it. And sometimes that comes later. So, but it's just sad, It says, there are many ways to be stuck. The instinct-injured woman usually gives herself away because she has a difficult time asking for help, recognizing her own needs. Her natural instincts to fight or flee are drastically slowed or extincted. Recognition of the sensations of satiation, off-taste, suspicion, caution, and the drive to love fully and freely are inhibited or exaggerated. And that right there is sad. We don't want any of this to stay injured. We don't want any of this to be inhibited, forever. This is the kind of stuff we want to work on. We want to be able to, for example, it says the drive to love fully and freely. We want to be able to love fully and freely again. We want to be able to do that because there are good people. As in the tale, one of the most insidious attacks on the wild self is to be directed to perform properly, implying a reward will follow, if ever, she has in parentheses. Though this method may, and she says, I emphasize may, temporarily persuade a 2-year-old to clean her room, like no playing with toys until the bed is made, it will never work in a vital woman's life. While consistency, follow-through, and organization are all essential to implementing creative life, the old woman's injunction to be proper kills off any opportunity to expand. So there's no room for growth. Again, there's no room for that creative force, which is a natural part of our soul. That's what gives you soul. That's what gives you, character and flavor. And it's a beautiful thing. You don't want to be a robot, but they, these robotic narcissists, they want you to be like them. And I think I've referenced this movie before. It reminds me of the Stepford Wives, and it's like, that's just what they want you to do. It's like killing off your spirit, I can't let them do that. It says it is play, not properness, that is the central artery, the core, the brainstem of creative life. The impulse to play is an instinct. And, again, if you watch animals, yes, it is. Even the older animals, they'll play too. So, it's not something to be ashamed of, to have character, to have self-expression, to just be natural, to, and I have experienced what it's like to be shamed, and you get to a point where you don't even know, what's okay and what's not okay with a certain person, because you're just being you're just being genuine. But see, that's just it. I feel like when we're being genuine and authentic, that in itself is shining a light on the fact that they're not. It's like exposing them. Just to be in your presence as a true and authentic person is uncomfortable for them. That's just what's coming to me. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts. So then she mentions Janis Joplin. She was, a very famous singer from the 60s. And she talks about how she, when she was growing up, she was mercilessly vilified by her teachers and many of those who surrounded her, and the good girl, she says, the good girl, white Southern Baptist community. And so she was an A student, which I didn't know, and a talented painter and everything, but she was ostracized by other girls for not wearing makeup and just for being herself. It says when she finally escaped to the world of the blue, she was so starved she could no longer tell when enough was enough. She had no limits around sex, liquor, or drugs. It's a very sad situation. So then she mentions other famous women like Marilyn Monroe and Judy Garland and different things. It says that they followed the same instinct-injured pattern of soul famine, attempting to fit and going intemperate, not being able to stop. It says we could make a very long list of instinct-injured, talented women who in their vulnerable state made very poor choices. And then she references the child in the tale. She says they all lost their handmade shoes somewhere along the way and found their way to the poisoned red shoes. It's like a substitute, the expensive red shoes the old lady bought that girl were a substitute, but they weren't the real thing. There is no substitute for the real thing. There is no substitute for being you and being true to yourself. You can't replace that with anything else. It says they were all filled with sorrow, for they hungered for spirit food, soul story, natural roving, self-decoration in keeping with their own needs, God learning, and a simple and sane sexuality. But they unwittingly chose the cursed shoes, beliefs, actions, ideas that caused life to deteriorate more and more, that turned them into madly dancing specters. Injury to instinct cannot be underestimated as the root of the issue when women are acting mad, are possessed by obsession, or when they are stuck in less malignant but nevertheless destructive patterns. The repair of injured instinct begins with acknowledging that a capture has taken place, that a soul famine has followed, that usual boundaries of insight and protection have been disturbed. The process that caused a woman's capture and the ensuing famine has to be reversed. Yes. So, she doesn't say how. She just then says, but first, many women go through the next few stages as described in the story. So maybe she will. Maybe she'll explain how later. I haven't got there yet, but it's interesting that she points out that the process that caused the capture and the famine has to be reversed. So, okay, so we'll go ahead and wrap this one up and keep it a little short. I think they're just a little bit easier to digest that way. And then I'll film another video for trap number 5, which is trying to sneak a secret life split in 2. So this will be really interesting, and we'll dive into that next. So thanks again for coming along, for all the likes, comments, support, thoughts, good vibes, prayers, all of it. I just appreciate it. I appreciate you so much, and thank you, and I will see you soon, and have a beautiful day. Bye.